Most thinking Americans now recognize the fact that our country is at war, a war declared against us by the rulers of international communism. It is called a Cold War because armed forces, although used as a threat, are rarely unleashed, and blood is not spilled in the massive battles that we think of as war. The communists realized that they could not survive the destructive force of an all-out conflict, so they adopt the Cold War tactic. Nevertheless, their objective remains the total conquest of all the earth. Among those who have long been aware of this menace is Dr. George S. Benson, president of Harding College and the National Education Program. Dr. Benson has earned national acclaim as a dynamic educational crusader for a better understanding of the American way of life. He is now speaking to a group of patriotic Americans on the subject, the war we are in. The second portion being televised concerns communism versus capitalism.
Now to the threat of communism.
You know, as Americans, we'd like to be free, to enjoy the economic well-being, the liberties that are ours under God. But unfortunately, that's not our lot. Unfortunately, communism is challenging every aspect of our American way of life today. We're meeting it on every front. This constitutes the greatest crisis in the history of America. President Kennedy, a few months ago, said this, and I quote, "No hour of any declared war ever presented a greater threat to our security than does the continuous onrush of international communism," end quotes. J. Edgar Hoover, in a speech a few weeks ago at Valley Forge, said international communism constitutes one of our two major threats today. General Eisenhower, toward the close of his second administration, directed the military to help alert the American public to the threat of international communism, the dangers of the fifth column within. The communists themselves make their intentions quite clear. We don't have to guess about what their intentions are. And I believe when we're speaking of the communists today and of their plans, we should speak very factually. We should be careful to document what we say. What I'm saying about the communists tonight and their attitude toward America and their plans here, I'm taking from primary sources. I want to quote from the World Marxist Review. This is an official communist publication. It's a monthly magazine, published in Russian, in Chinese, in German, in English. This English version you may order from Progress Books, 42 Stafford Street, Toronto 3, Ontario, Canada. You may get single issues for 35 cents, $3.50 by the year. Then I want to use as another source of authority a speech made by Mr. Khrushchev on January 6, 1961, and which has been called the greatest document coming out of Moscow since the end of the war. Then I want to use the United States in today's world. This book is written by Gus Hall, Executive Secretary of the Communist Party, published February of last year. I would term it a primer for communist action in America. In Moscow, in November and December of 1960, was held the greatest meeting that the communists have yet held. 81 communist parties were present. This includes, of course, the Communist Party of Russia, China, and the various satellites, but it includes also the Communist Party of England, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, and the Communist Party USA. 81 communist parties represented at Moscow. They remained in session for 5 weeks. Out of that meeting came what has been called the Revised Communist Manifesto. And I have a copy of it here, and you can obtain it from the government printing office, Washington, D.C. You also may find in the World Marxist Review for December 1960 a report on the meeting of the 81 parties. Then in the following January 6, 1961, Mr. Khrushchev delivered this famous speech in Moscow. You may obtain a copy of it, likewise by writing the government printing office. Not only a copy of it, but an analysis of it also. The analysis made by Dr. Pisoni, Professor of Political Science, Graduate Division, Washington University. From these you find certain very clear-cut statements. I'll not take time to quote from these tonight, but I want to summarize what's there, and I'll quote nothing that isn't also included in the summary that was made for the subcommittee to the Senate on Internal Security and given under oath. And remember, this Revised Communist Manifesto was signed by all 81 communist parties. First, the 81 parties and Mr. Khrushchev called for stepping up the Cold War against all capitalist nations, quotes, of which the United States is chiefest. It also calls for great care to avoid a hot war now. Mr. Khrushchev made very clear that a hot war now would be to the disadvantage of the Communist Party. He knows well they'd lose a hot war now. U.S. News World Report was voted a few months ago by the American Association of Professors of Journalism from our colleges and universities to represent the best reporting available in America today. U.S. News World Report a few months ago compared current striking power of America and Russia with atomic weapons. And it carried this statement, and I quote, "As of now, America could rain 20 times as much destruction upon Russia as Russia could rain upon America," end quotes. That's why Khrushchev does not want a hot war now. He knows he's not prepared to win it. He understands our power better than most of us do. That's part of his business. Then next, he said, in the meantime, while promoting the Cold War, weaken America, but build up Russia's atomic power. Then he asked and answered this question: can atomic war be indefinitely avoided? And he said it can on one condition, the condition being that all capitalist nations capitulate. But he said some of the capitalist nations may not capitulate. In that event, he said, there will in the end be atomic war. Now that gives very clearly the communist attitude in this crisis. They don't want a hot war now because they know they'd lose it. But they do intend to carry on the Cold War and to thereby weaken America, destroy her will to resist, while building Russia's atomic strength and the strength of other communist nations until they get ready for the hot war, when they would call on us to capitulate or would be atomic war. Then following this meeting of the 81 parties and a famous speech by Khrushchev came the 22nd Communist Congress in Moscow in October of 1961. And there came other declarations. Among them was this: the greatest exploiting nation in the world is the United States. which is accordingly the enemy of all mankind. That was followed by another statement dedicating all the powers and energies of the communist nations to the overthrow of all capitalist and oppressive nations, of which it said the United States is chiefest. So they have all signed a statement declaring that their energies and their resources are dedicated to our destruction. But a Cold War for the time being till they get ready for a hot war. Mr. Khrushchev also advocated certain methods for promoting the Cold War. One, he said, talk up peace. He said, our greatest advantage is the fact we carry the banner of peace. Well, in reality, what do they mean by peace? Why is it that the communists always talk peace and are always stirring up trouble? Well, to us that doesn't seem harmonious. But to them it does seem harmonious, and it is. Why? Because when they talk about peace, they do not mean what we mean when we talk about peace. When we talk of peace, we'd like to have it achieved now. We'd like for hostilities to be put out of the minds of people. We'd like to feel we could look forward to a world in which there would be no hostilities. Is that what a Russian means when he talks about peace? Not on your life. He believes there can be no peace in the world so long as capitalism prevails anywhere. So when he talks about peace, he's talking about that condition which will prevail after capitalism has been destroyed. So to the communist, peace means destroy the capitalist countries. That's exactly what it means. That's communist language. He talks about the struggle, and it's the struggle to destroy the capitalist nations. He talks about peace, and that's the conditions that's to prevail when the struggle has been terminated. Then he said, talk peace fronts. Promote peace fronts. What's a peace front? Well, that's an organization led perhaps by some fairly well-known churchman, and which probably circulates petitions, and which says this: atomic war is too terrible to imagine. We must have no atomic war. America should convince the world that she'll never engage in an atomic war. If necessary, we should unilaterally disarm. If necessary, we should sink our weapons in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, to do that wouldn't mean avoiding war. That's the shortest way to get into war. We're not in war now only because we are stronger than Russia. But if we should sink our atomic weapons, we'd no longer be stronger. We're only stronger in atomic weapons. They are stronger in conventional weapons and numbers of soldiers. We are superior in atomic weapons only. Now, if we sink those, we're no longer superior and would be in war immediately. But nevertheless, that's the work of the peace fronts. They are helping the Russian cause, trying to dissuade us from any will to resist with the only kind of weapons with which we can win. Did you note how Mr. Khrushchev tried hard to get Mr. Kennedy to agree that there would be no atomic weapons used in Germany, at Berlin? And had we agreed to that, they would have immediately taken Berlin. But they don't want to get into an atomic war. They know they'd lose it. So, talk up your peace fronts. Kill the will in America to ever use atomic weapons. Then next he said, coexistence has served us well. Keep talking coexistence. What is coexistence? Well, that simply means this. You let me alone till I get strong enough, and then I'll knock your block off. That's coexistence. Because the communists aim at world domination. Therefore, they have no intention of agreeing to stop at any given line, short of complete world domination. But remember, Khrushchev said we don't want a hot war now. But he said time is the main thing, and I'm quoting him exactly, time is the main thing. He said new peoples, new countries keep joining our side. There are none joining the capitalist side. All we need is time. He said we're gaining rapidly on the capitalist nations in production. All we need is time. He said by 1970 we'll surpass America. By 1975 we'll be far ahead of them. Now that would indicate that he thinks somewhere between 1970 and 75 will be the time he can call for our capitulation or atomic war. So in the meantime, talk peace front, talk coexistence, throw them off guard while we get ready to knock them out. And remember, all communist resources are dedicated to the destruction of exploiting nations, of which America is chiefest. Now, what are some of the other means of carrying on the war? The Cold War. Khrushchev underscored and gave priority to opposition to anti-communist groups. Never before had they taken note of the anti-communist groups. But in the meeting of the 81 parties, they went on record as saying that the anti-communist groups can do us great harm. Well, now, when you understand communism, you know that's an order to start fighting the anti-communist groups. Then when Khrushchev delivered his famous speech, which is reported in this magazine for January 1961, the first 25 pages in that number, reported speech, he again called for opposition to the anti-communist groups. Then in the 22nd Congress, last October, he again underscored the importance of destroying the anti-communist groups. So that has priority. And have you noticed how it's been stepped up in America? The papers that first started it were, of course, The Worker. Here is what was long called the Daily Worker, an official communist publication. This is the one that started calling conservatives ultra-conservatives and ultra-rightists. I've been given both of those names, first by this publication. I'm on the honor list. And then that was followed by New America. This is the official socialist publication, Norman Thomas being one of the regular writers, and he proceeded there to likewise assign those same titles to those fighting communism. Now remember, those titles that appear bad are for the purpose of discouraging and stopping the anti-communist groups. So any anti-communist group today that is effective at all in fighting communism is on the must list with Mr. Khrushchev, with the 81 parties, and with Gus Hall, Executive Secretary of the Communist Party, USA. So expect, if you are effective in fighting communism, you're certainly going to be smeared by these particular publications. The communists and fellow travelers are under orders to fight the anti-communist groups in America. It's going to come. If your very fine youth organization becomes effective in fighting communism, they'll try to infiltrate it and get control of it, and if that doesn't work, they'll try smearing it and try to make it useless and impotent by smearing it. Those are communist tactics, and the communists are under orders to use them. And they're under orders to fight anti-communist groups. Smearing, assigning brands is one of their favorite ways of fighting. Gus Hall, Executive Secretary of the Communist Party, brought out this book 1 month after Mr. Khrushchev's famous speech, 2 months after the closing of the meeting of the 81 parties in Moscow. This book is actually Gus Hall's report to the Communist Party USA. It's the primer for communist activity in America. And here are some of the things that Gus Hall urges them to do. Number one, blame all of America's ills on capitalism. Make capitalism unpopular. Why make capitalism unpopular? Because that's our means of production. And with 6% of the world's people, we're producing 44% of the world's manufactured goods. During World War II, this nation built more weapons than our enemies and their allies all combined. So it's pretty important to try to stop our marvelous productivity. So Gus Hall says, blame all of America's ills on capitalism. Build hatred for capitalism. Then he said, infiltrate employees and alienate them against their employers. Make them think their wages are not high enough, working conditions not good enough. Alienate them from their employers. Then he said, work for much shorter hours and much higher wages. Well, those two things would put us out of the markets if achieved. The markets of the world. We'd lose markets both at home and abroad. Then he said, work with the colored. Join them in any problem they have. Be their friend under all circumstances. Make the Communist Party appear to be the party of the colored. Make it appear to be the party of the workers, the employees. Well, so much for Gus Hall's instruction. He also said, work every evening, work every Sunday, get out and visit people, find prospects for the party, and then cultivate them and try to lead them into the party. Next, he said, work for leadership in many non-communist organizations. Gus Hall said the communists are not numerous enough to take over in America. We can never do it until we gain leadership of many organizations which we did not start. All right, there's your order to the communists in America, to gain leadership of as many organizations as possible that they didn't start. Gain them undercover, gain them not as communists, appear to be the workingest person in the organization you're trying to get control of, appear to have at heart its goals. Get control, and then you can direct it as you try. He also said concentrate on women's organizations. He also named 5 states for special concentration. States that have large city populations and lots of dissidents, another place to work.
This has been a television recording of Dr. George S. Benson speaking on the subject, The War We're In. This portion is the second in a series of 3 and was entitled Communism versus Capitalism. Part 3 of this address is on the subject, Challenge to Americans.